Good morning, Chicago downtown office. This is so exciting to be live. Never mind. We were going to be live. We tried to reschedule this thing, I think at Drew's building, 110 North Wacker.
Yeah.
Like 2 times. I don't know what to do, folks. Let's all go get vaccinated or whatever. This is getting kind of old, but this is the best we can do. We got 2 great panels today with lots of great speakers. So we're going to power through it and enjoy this as much as we can. I'm going to do my weekly comedy routine and try to do a screen share here. Let's see. There we go. So this is us, Illinois Real Estate Journal, 2nd annual State of the Downtown Office, West Loop, Fulton Market. Love this event. Special thanks to these sponsors. Without these sponsors, we wouldn't have been able to pivot to do these things online. We needed you all to step up and help us create an online platform, and you did. It's been fantastic. Love all of you. Special thanks to everybody that's on here. I'll read these off before the second panel and say thank you again. I got to say special thanks to Comcast because they're the connectivity sponsor, and we're not in 110 North Wacker where they're the connectivity provider. But, you know, they're still here helping us connect via the interwebs and talk to each other. This is us, RE Journals. If you didn't know, before we're in 17 states across the Midwest, 6 publications. We have Red News in Texas. Big presence there. State of Downtown Office, West Loop, Fulton Market. This is your first panel. I am going to turn it over. Erin, the show's all yours. If you need anything, just holler, just say, hey, Todd, and I'll be here in the background and give you a warning when you got 5 minutes left. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to RE Journals for hosting this morning, and thank you to everyone who is joining us out there. I'm Erin Miller, Business Development Director for Clarion Construction. We are an interior general contractor, and we've been around the Chicagoland area for about 30 years. We're focused on office and industrial projects, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm super excited to have our panel of 4 awesome panelists, and we're going to be talking about the current state of downtown office. So downtown office and what's happening in the West Loop? What's the state of current workspaces out there? So if you have any questions throughout, make sure you're putting them in the chat function and we'll do our best to answer at the end. But without further ado, let's get some introductions and let's kick it off with Drew. Drew, can you say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thanks, Erin. Good morning, and glad to be here with everyone else on the panel and the hundreds that are out there that I can't see. And you can see behind me is downtown. So I just want to let you know that's not a virtual thing. It's a real thing. So I'm Drew Neiman. I'm Executive Vice President and Principal in Riverside Investment and Development, which is a Chicago-based real estate developer. I've been doing this real estate this real estate business, and with an emphasis on leasing is really what my expertise is, for about 35 years. 5 to 7 of those years I spent with Mr. Wislow, enjoyed every moment of it, and with John Buck and a few others. And so it's been great. And you know, I live and breathe office, and so that's why I love, you know, when I can get a chance on these panels, I like to weigh in. So I don't know who's next, Bob.
Amazing. Tom, go ahead and take it for us.
Of course. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Glad to be here and looking forward to the discussion. I'm Tom Sitz. I'm an executive director with Cushman & Wakefield here in Chicago. As you can probably tell, coming to you from the Lincoln Park office, call it Cushman North. And my team and I specialize on office capital markets transactions throughout Chicago and the Midwest. And looking forward to the discussion today.
Wonderful. Bob?
Good morning. I'm Bob Wislow, and I'm the CEO and co-founder with Kanish Omi of Parkside Realty. I told the panel when we had our little rehearsal that this month I'm celebrating my 51st year in Chicago's commercial real estate business. Parkside Realty is a new company. It's a follow-on of a company Kanish and I founded in 1978, U.S. Equities Realty. And our company is focused on the development, the management, marketing, and leasing of properties that we own for our own generational hold portfolio. We just finished our first development project, Fulton East at 215 North Peoria, and glad to be with you this morning.
Amazing. And we saved the best for last.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katherine VanBerschot. I am a senior private banker with Wells Fargo in Chicago. I'm in the office today, so rest assured that office is still existing.
Wonderful. Well, let's kick it off by talking about the current investment and development climate for downtown office. Tom, can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on downtown?
Of course, happy to. I think the short answer is it continues to be slow downtown. I think if you go back to the beginning of 2020, the first 2.5 months of 2020 were shaping up to be amongst the busiest in my career in this business, and it was looking to be an exceptionally busy year. Though, as we all know, COVID broke loose in the middle of March, and no surprise, things quickly came to a screeching halt. And really stayed that way for the better part of, call it, 3 to 6 months. But as the situation began to stabilize as we moved throughout 2020, there was an ability to push transactions forward across the board. You know, as I mentioned before, I focus primarily on office, but that certainly was the case. You know, there are many in the industrial or apartment sectors that had record years. I think the misconception in the office sector is there was not liquidity for office product in Chicago and the broader Midwest, and that's not the case. That all said, it was a slow year. So I think if you look at high-level statistics for downtown Chicago, we saw office transaction volume of about 1.3 billion across 8 deals. And to find a lower annual total than that, you would need to go back to 2011. I think even by 2019 standards, which I think most would recognize as a down year, for transaction activity, we saw 1.7 billion, and the long-term average going back 20 years is 3 billion. So point is, any way you slice it and dice it, it was certainly a down year. With that said, now that we have turned the page into 2021, have not seen a wave of activity, but have seen an uptick in discussions, valuation requests, and pitches that I think are indicative of the decision-making process that many are going through as they figure out the business plan for 2021. So I think our anticipation is that it will remain relatively quiet for the next couple of months, but as this vaccine distribution continues and that light at the end of the tunnel comes more into focus, we are very hopeful and expect that the second half of 2021 could see a wave of activity as sellers in particular that have been sitting on the sidelines for the last year or so begin to go through some of those decision-making process and move assets to market.
Fantastic. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Well, Tom, although the market was slow this year, you set 2 records for our market with your sale of the Mondelez headquarters and McDonald's. I think it'd be interesting to address the fact that Fulton Market has held up so well in this market.
Fair comment. We were not involved in McDonald's, but did set a record in terms of the largest deal to transact in the West Loop this time around. And Mondelez certainly on a price per pound perspective set a new record for Chicago office, which something we're certainly proud of. But I do think that is indicative of a trend that we've seen over the last year. You sort of have a barbell effect in terms of liquidity for office product. On one end of the spectrum, you've got core product with credit and term in the rent roll that continues to be very, very liquid and attractive. And that's proven out by the transactions that Bob just mentioned there. And then on the other end of the spectrum, with more value add or even opportunistic profiles, there's definitely capital there. I think what we're seeing is a bid-ask spread that continues, but I think the expectation as we move 6, 12, 18 months down the road, that gap should close and facilitate transaction activity.
I would say that, you know, the thing that, you know, Bob and I focus on as developers is people showing up at work. Like Catherine's at the office today. I'm very excited. I'd ring that bell if I could. But I think I saw on a national average, the occupancy of office buildings is hovering around 10 to 12%, somewhere in that range. I know our buildings, every day we get the numbers that come in from 150 Riverside, and and they're anywhere. I think the high was 12% one day, but the average is probably more like 9 or 10. I think Texas is leading the charge in the country, has around 25% occupancy. So these are things, everybody's still paying rent. Everybody's here. It's just they're not physically here, and you really kind of need that to help Tom's case, because at some point these investors are saying, great, when's everybody getting back to work? And we all have that question, and that date keeps getting pushed a little. But the most recent conversations we've had with our tenants, and trust me, we're having them, lots of them over, and everybody's in this together. I would say, it would appear to be midsummer that I think we'll see that probably enough of the vaccine will be out and people will feel more comfortable. Bob and I've worked hard on making buildings feel, be safer and environmentally more friendly and better for tenants. But that helps getting people comfortable coming back from an air quality and all that. But it's just one of those things that we're all just kind of waiting for this momentum, and it, it's when it's all said and done, it's office tenants. They've got to show up and they got to be in the buildings for us to have retail go, for us to continue leasing, for Tom to sell buildings. There's got to be this inertia that everyone agrees in is happening.
Well, there was a great piece of news this morning that the Biden administration is finalizing conversations to purchase enough vaccine to basically inoculate well over 300 million people with both shots by midsummer. So that was a great announcement this morning, and I think will be really positive for our business.
Good.
That's wonderful.
Add in a little comment to the investment side. I think people are sort of holding back to see if there was going to be some deals to be, if some discounted deals to be had, whether they come out of a workout team or if the asking price is just right for them to make that action. So I think some people are holding some dry powder on the sidelines for right now.
Good point, Catherine.
So getting back to what Drew was chatting about and getting tenants back in the building, what kind of changes are you really implementing to retain and attract your tenants in office buildings?
Well, if you can imagine, as Tom said, I think it was mid-March when everything hit the skids. And if I'm not mistaken, I would say everybody on this panel, even Todd probably, is a type A. We don't do well in down markets or markets that say there's nothing to do. You call the brokers, they have no one. Their clients aren't getting back to them. Their clients don't know what they're doing. I've just never seen anything like that. So I spent a lot of time in Naples. Not that you asked, but but what we did was we said, what can we do in this downtime so that when things turn around, we'll be better positioned. And one of those is I hinted, which is, health and wellness. There's a new certification coming out. Bob, I'd mentioned this before in our pre-talk yesterday, which is called a well certified building, kind of like LEED was, when it came out. And this relates to environmental and healthy and everything related to that, air filters, touchless systems. And so that's what we've worked on, Erin, was implementing what we call a backup air purification system. And we not only came up with it, we installed it in our two existing assets. Well, 150 Riverside, we just put it into 110, and we're going to have it into Union Station. And then anything you can where you can wave your hand and a door opens so you don't have to touch it and things like that. So we just thought about everything that we think tenants, and prospective tenants will think about, and that hopefully when that time comes to either enter back in the building or make a decision about relocating or locating, that those things will be at the top of the list, where before they were not. It was more about what's my view, how close am I to the trains, things like that. So it's just another level of stuff that if you're a proactive developer, I think it's kind of where you should be.
For sure. Throughout construction, we've been seeing a lot of HVAC upgrades. We've been seeing a lot of private offices being built where there once were a lot of benching and, co-working spaces, a lot of automating of conference room systems, et cetera. So that
Yep.
is definitely top of mind.
So
How
Erin, I'd
severely?
like to underscore what Drew said.
Yeah.
Sustainability and green buildings and LEED certification over the last 8-9 years have become, just almost automatic. You've got to have that LEED certification on your building. I don't think there's any doubt that going forward, the wellness and the health of buildings is going to be really one of the most important things. When we did our Fulton Market building, we were already building a building that was built along biofilmic principles to be a very healthy and well building. But when the pandemic struck about mid-February, we just stopped and said, like Drew, what can we do with the building to make this completely safe? And we did very similar things. We did different kinds of things than Drew did with his building because ours is a different building. But we did an air and surface purification system that we became so enamored with that we went back and have retrofitted all of our buildings, every single one of them, with that system. We installed the first hands-free elevator system in the building, which we are now doing in all of our buildings as well. So it's not just in new product, but it's what developers and building owners really have to do from a fiduciary responsibility to protect our tenants' employees who come into that building. And it's not just this pandemic. The things that we're doing in these buildings today protect people in the cold and the flu season, and also protect against any other thing that will happen in the future. And that factor of having your employees at work more often and not sick and in a healthier environment is going to be very important. And it'll get people to come back to work because they'll feel safe coming back to work.
And if I could just add in, I agree with these, the two gentlemen. Another spin to it is that it'll help businesses with their ESG ratings and being able to qualify as a potential ESG company within investment profiles. So there is a little bit of a opportunistic angle for companies as well.
Would you mind explaining a little bit more about ESG? What is that?
Sure. So ESG, environmental social governance, is right now there's not as hard of a standard as what qualifies and what doesn't, but that's, I think, coming out in the near future. So corporations will, in a lot of their annual earnings, start to address if they're an ESG corporation, and it kind of becomes an investment profile. So some people can say, I only want to invest in ESG companies. Right now, some large public companies might be excluded, but as long as we keep moving that forward, this will help mark them as a potential ESG company.
Wow.
To it.
That's fantastic. So how long do we think the office market is really going to take to rally after the pandemic? I don't know if we can say after, if there's an after, but anyone want to weigh in?
Do you have a dartboard, Tom? You can, you never know when things get pent up. Here's one good thing. People have leases. Leases have expiration dates. And none of the leases that were signed prior to this pandemic have pandemic clauses. So, people do have to make decisions based on those kind of things. And so even though, the normal activity is down, we have activity, we have proposals, we have RFPs. We just gotten one, we're getting new ones. I had a virtual pitch yesterday, which was, interesting, 45 minutes. I'm like, 45 minutes, that's like no time. And they're all on the screen and they're in different parts of wherever they are. And if things go well, you'll get an RFP. And if you do the RFP, then everything goes well, they may risk it and say, let's do a real tour in person. And then you kind of go from there. And, so it's interesting to see the bigger users, who have expirations in 22, 23, 24, they're out, they're taking a look, but they're not as pressured as those that are smaller that have to be in by this July. So you kind of, all those things get, thrown into the mixer. And you just hope that, you know, the momentum starts and it's a wave that slowly builds. No matter how much hard work Bob and I or Tom or Catherine we do, you know, we can't make people come back to work.
Well, Drew, as we talked in the pre-section, there's what 15 to 20 million square feet of space that come available, leases that expire every year.
Yeah,
And if
in
you
Chicago,
anticipate-
right?
in
Yeah.
Chicago, right, in the city. And if you anticipate that some of those people have done short-term renewals, some have done nothing, trying to decide what to do. So if you get that roll of 30 to 40 million square feet of lease expirations that have not necessarily been satisfied in this year and a half to 2 years of the pandemic, I think that once the population's vaccinated and people are making their decisions about what's going to happen, we're going to see a real explosion in leases being signed at the end of this year.
I'm in.
I-
predicting, Drew. I'm predicting.
And
know.
I agree with everything Drew and Bob had said here. And the question was certainly posed from a leasing perspective, but I think taking a capital markets spin on it, you know, jiving with what I mentioned earlier, you know, as you move into the summer and the second half of this year, investors typically follow leasing activity. They follow leasing fundamentals. And as those tenants come back to the office and in many ways re-engage in processes that were running previously to fulfill those longer term lease requirements, investors will follow. And I also think there's a not insignificant component of the investment community that is focused on attempting to get ahead of that surge. So that is part of what drives our thinking that, you know, seeing a wave of activity after we get past the spring and into early summer, and certainly the second half of the year, you know, we have very hopeful for what we'll see the second half of 21.
As we're talking about investment and development, let's shift to the West Loop. What areas of the West Loop do we still see as ripe for additional development? Are there any?
I think that the area between downtown and the train stations on the east and on the other side of the expressway on the west, the Fulton Market, West Loop area, there's a gap in there. I think the post office development showed us that you can fill that gap. And Drew is now doing the building for BMO Harris in that kind of gap space. If you look at that gap, there's been some office buildings developed on the more of the suburban scale in that area, but there hasn't been any major development in that area that I call the West Loop gap. And if you take that area from the post office and continue north all the way to the Tribune Freedom Center site, which is probably the last remaining adjacent to downtown land along the river, I believe you have a development strip in there, which is going to be the next big thing for our city. It just makes logical sense that you're getting development squeezing from both ways. And the beauty of that area is you're walking distance from the train. No different than Wacker Drive became such an important area of our city, became the most important street because you were walking distance from the train. It's the same way going west into that area.
Yeah. I would agree with Bob that that's the next spot. You know, Wacker Drive has done phenomenal. The river, you know, and the city helped big time rediscovering our river and our river's edge. Everything there is turned to gold, really. And so now you've got to kind of infill that around the transportation, you know, Metro and Ogilvy and Union and so I would agree that that's it, and that the Tribune parcel is one that you know, Amazon looked at really hard when they came, and it's not going to stay that way for a long time. You know, for a while, it's going to 3 to 5 years that'll start to get going, and it'll take time. It's almost 40 acres, but it's kind of infill that would fill into actually Fulton Market, right? Would make it a contiguous block of development. So I think we got enough to chew on when things get good.
I'd also add that I don't think it's going to be exclusive to office. You're going to see a blend with your multifamily, you know, some retail, mixed use, things like that, to make it a real viable. I don't know if we have necessarily I think we have a lot of office we get to chew on already with some great developments just happened. So you got to make it a little bit more unique and flexible.
Well, I also think, Catherine, in order to make retail successful,
For
office,
sure. So one of
office is
the
great,
questions
right?
actually from the chat,
Oh, is that right?
for sure. One of the questions from the chat is actually, how far west do we see the development going? So yeah, that gap right there is definitely ripe for development, but do we see it going further west
I
than
don't
it
know.
currently is?
What do you think, Bob? Ogden or?
Well, it's gone to Ogden already. I mean, we,
Yeah.
we've got a major building, the Trammell Crow's done there. They're now developing a laboratory building right in Ogden. And there is no doubt that there is some development spurting on the north side of Ogden. So I do think that we've gone to Ogden, and it's a good street from a transportation standpoint. But I think that if you look at further development coming in, I think your development's going to be safer if you get in that kind of gap area by the trains, because your transportation is better in that area. And then you have the nexus for all of the restaurants. I couldn't agree with Catherine more. I think it's going to be mixed use. And that is going to be the beauty of the development in this area. Downtown was always just exclusively commercial until about 20 years ago, when we started to get some of the apartments built and some of the conversions of buildings into apartments, which made downtown an even more attractive place to be. But the beauty of the West Loop and Fulton Market in this area that Drew and I are talking about, between the two of those, will all be live, work, play environments. And I believe that's the way the future is going to go. You get much better retail, much better restaurants developed in an environment that's a live, work, play environment, because they don't have to close after work when everybody goes to the train to go home, and you have a much better work environment. And the millennials today don't work normal hours. So, you have people who come in for evening shifts, are there in the weekend. I think office buildings are going to morph much more towards having a residential feel to them because of that. And in that kind of environment, not different than the Soho and the meat packing district in New York, has been so successful because of that. I think that's why Fulton Market exploded the way it did. So I agree with you totally, Catherine.
Fantastic. So kind of backtracking a little bit, do we see the Chicago office market as being severely affected? Drew, you were talking about your buildings having done really well as far as leasing goes throughout this whole pandemic, but do we think the market as a whole has taken a huge hit?
The other aspect of the pandemic relates to companies and how they have fared during this time and how they will fare going forward. And so that's, also was part of the inactivity, is not only the concern for air quality and things like that, but it's the concern for their business being able to, go forward and grow. And so there's been an abundance, at least reported, and there's been some discussion of whether it's accurate or not, of sublease space hitting the market. And that's some of the major companies saying, you know what, we may leave a portion of our workforce at home and this works. And so we don't need as much space. So I'm going to put a floor on the market, and then, that gets momentum, and more people that feel that same way do that. And next thing you know, your vacancy, which was a direct vacancy of 13%, all of a sudden, might bump up to 18% for the moment. But I've also heard that a lot of people said people have put their space on the market to kind of test it and see, and that they've had deals where people have come back and said, okay, we'll do this. And they've reneged or said, we've rethought this, we're not going to do that. So I don't have a real, I'm not have full conviction yet on what's going on, but this will make the market a little more soft, this downtime and in this environment. Not to mention, Katie talked about, are there deals out there? There are funds that are set up to take advantage of when things are down and people are hurting. That you come in and you get a good deal. Usually, I would say that's probably more B buildings or A- or even dirt, for future development. But I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen people, admit that this is something they have to do and they have to dispose of things. So So far, I think everything's hanging in there, and I'm just keeping an eye on the sublease market a bit. But I would say that if Bob and I want to continue our leasing and our momentum, it's possible we may have to be a little more aggressive, or we may decide, let's go get a deal done here to keep that momentum. And it might be a little different than what we originally projected from a pro forma standpoint.
Well, Drew, I think you have to look further than locally. I think one of the things that's going to happen from this pandemic is going to be in Chicago's advantage, as climate change has been in Chicago's advantage. And that is, people are realizing now you don't have to live and work in San Francisco. You don't have to live and work in Seattle, cities that are pretty tough to live in. And I think it's going to prove to the world that Chicago can be that second headquarters city quite easily. Our cost of living is so dramatically different than Austin or Seattle or San Francisco or Boston or New York. The workforce, everybody knows, is a better workforce. And now that we're proving to people you don't have to be in those cities to work, I think we're going to open up the Chicago market. And I think that's going to build upon the fact that this last year was probably the worst climate change disaster year that we've seen, with the continual hurricanes. We got through the alphabet 1.5 times at hurricanes on the East Coast, and the fires on the West Coast and into the Colorado area have been just devastating. And we become an amazing safe haven for people. I think coming out of this pandemic, Chicago's going to see a real boom.
I sure hope so. From a construction perspective, I know that we've been feeling it as far as the types of products, at least in office, that we've been building. We've shifted more from tenant-driven projects to capital improvements. We've been doing a lot of work in buildings to do lobby renovations, do corridors and restrooms while tenants aren't in the buildings, being able to do it on daytime versus nighttime and saving money in that perspective. But overall, there aren't people making those decisions yet. They're kind of holding back, just like what Katherine said, and really waiting to kind of upgrade their spaces. So we're hoping things get moving as soon as summer.
Yeah, and I think that's because people don't know what to do with their spaces yet.
For sure.
People don't know, we had this amazing densification that's been happening for the last 7 or 8 years, in which we've been just reducing the amount of office space per person, continually down and down and down. I don't think there's any doubt that that's going to change and go the opposite direction, which will create a demand for space for people. But people don't know exactly what to do yet. They don't want to take that interim approach to say, I'm going to build something for COVID time when they anticipate that COVID's going to be over. But subsequent to that, I don't think they want to build space the way they used to build it in the past, because I don't think people are going to want to work in that environment given this experience we've been in. So I think we're going to see a de-densification of space and a redesign of how people are going to use space, just like we were having the densification redesign, but the opposite direction. And I think that'll be another pressure on the market for space utilization, especially in buildings that are prepared to have people come back to work and handle it in that way.
I'd just like to add, I agree with Bob. I think the key here is flexibility. Nobody's quite sure how it's going to look. When people get here and come back to the office, there's going to be an evaluation of how they feel. Do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable? I don't see the 5 days in the office coming back. I think it's going to be somewhere between 2 and 3, and it might be a rotating schedule. There's going to be a lot more emphasis on always cleaning, touchless, as Drew mentioned earlier. But I think flexibility is the key to the future, and we're just going to have to see how it all flows.
Well, I know that Drew and we are installing into our buildings reading devices that, in fact, tenants can even look on their own iPhone to see what your air quality is. So I think you're absolutely right. People are going to want to have to feel safe. They're going to see the devices that are cleaning the air and surfaces. They're going to not touch things. They're not going to want to be in a benching environment directly across from somebody with people on both sides of them. And I think that's going to change the way we work. I do think you're right that there may be some more working from home, but you may remember in the 2013, 2014s, companies like Yahoo went to a work from home environment and stopped it because their productivity dropped so much. And when they brought it back, their productivity increased within a year. So I don't think that that's a permanent trend, but I do think, it may be a day or two a week that you're not in the office. But we're social animals. We go to school from grammar school, kindergarten, all the way on with people all around us. You get to college and you're in fraternities and sororities and clubs, and then all of a sudden you go in a work environment where you work from home. I don't think that's going to work. I just don't think that is going to be the long range. I think we'll be back in the office for the majority of the time.
Bob, do you know the name of the app to check the air quality? One of our audience members is asking.
I'm sorry, I don't, but I can get it to them. There's 3 companies out there that are doing that quite well. This one is through Cohesion, and they're supporting that particular app, but I don't know the app's name itself. It's a subset of the Cohesion.
Cool.
Exactly that. And the other thing is that will now start to get folded into the building app, because the best of all would be you go to one location and you can check your air quality, you can make a reservation or you can get the trainer to get you so you can go work out for an hour. You can order food, all the things we do.
Our head of property management just chatted. It's the particular app is Air Things.
Yep.
And I first saw this when I went to Singapore. And you walk into an office building and there's a screen up telling you what the air quality is at the moment. So all the employees come in and know the air quality in the building. And that was almost 2 years ago that they were doing that. So it had nothing to do with COVID. It had to do with air quality. By the time you reach 80 years old in the United States, you've spent 76 years inhaling indoor air. So as a wellness from buildings in the future, I think air quality on particulate matter is going to be just as important as air quality on a virus and bacterial level. There is a great book out called Healthy Building by 2 professors who came from industry, 2 Harvard professors. And if you read that book, I think you'll learn a lot about what the future of office buildings is going to look like from an air quality standpoint.
Yeah, good book.
Awesome. So what do we think? This is another question from the audience. What do we think owners will be doing with their outdoor spaces? Will they be redeveloping them to allow for 3-season workspaces?
I don't think there's any doubt about that. That started well before the pandemic. Chicago finally started celebrating our rooftops. I grew up in this city. I've never lived anywhere else. And, apartment buildings always snuck stuff up on the rooftops in those days. But now we're celebrating them. I think outdoor space is going to become even more important and intensely important. And if you look at what people are doing, for instance, in the new building we just built, we put a balcony on every floor so every tenant can have their own outdoor space, private space on the floor. You're just seeing that starting in office buildings. It was always in apartment buildings. I think it's going to be incorporated into the design in very ingenious ways at various points of the building level so that you can break up that outdoor space. I think it'll be intensely important.
That's amazing. What about all of the demand for these mega developments? We've been talking a lot about individual office spaces, but what about office buildings as a whole?
I'm not sure. Do you mean more than one building or you mean big buildings? When you're saying mega developments.
Like the campus?
I'm going to go with, let's pick one. Can we go with both?
Sure,
D, all of the above?
Yeah. Well, so there's, Bob knows, like we've been doing buildings. I would say if it's individual buildings being big buildings, that's kind of where I hang with Riverside and John O'Donnell. And, these are 50+ story buildings and they're a different animal. And, you've got to load them up with all the amenities that the tenants are looking for, from great food service to fitness, health and wellness. Now we've got, treatment rooms, outdoor terraces like Bob's talking about, or, balconies, depending on the design of the building and we're not the greatest environment. This isn't San Diego, but people really love their ability to go out there. And if you put the 7 to 8 foot high of glass panels and you really work hard to develop those areas out there, you know, they could probably be used 3/4 of the time. You heat them at the bottom. You can have heaters out there, a lot of electrical. But you know, parking, conference centers. But what's happened is, you know, how will people come back to these areas? These are areas we developed. These are all pre-COVID. And so you've got to come back and say, great, they're going to be used, but they're going to be used a little differently, at least for the next 12 to 24 months. And then maybe we'll see if everybody's vaccinated, that goes away and we're back to, you know, how, you know, the density we had designed it for. But right now we've got to have that flexibility in the environmental side to be able to, if people are nervous, they can do this. If they're not, they can do that. You know what I mean? You got to give them that range or ability to do that. And so, you know, the big buildings got to handle all those things within one kind of environmental envelope. And then if you're smart, part of your land should be open area, whether that's a park, which we've been fortunate to have with our buildings, or an adjacent outdoor area or a plaza, or some of the restaurants now we're putting in nano walls, which means walls that slide and they open up almost like sliding doors that open up the entire restaurant to the outside, things like that. So again, trying to bring in more fresh air.
Erin, to your question on the large buildings, for a developer like me who grew up in the 70s and 80s, you know, big tall buildings doing 50-story buildings has always been a thrill. But we've taken the complete opposite direction with a new company that Camille and I started. And that is, we're going for boutique office buildings because we think while there's the great market for the big buildings with the huge views, there's going to be a continued market for the boutique, smaller buildings, you know, smaller type environment, less density in the building, more opportunity for dedicated office space, outdoor space on each floor, less sharing of the amenities, less sharing of the rooftop. So a completely different approach, you know, staying in that, you know, single elevator, not multiple banks, you know, smaller 12-story type buildings. And that's the direction of our new company moving forward in the future. So it's just the opposite of where I've been most of my career.
So following on Bob's comment, if you took some of the, we'll call mega being more land. So let's say like the Tribune, 38, 40 acres, or going up north with Sterling Bay's property, or the 78. Those are more what you would call campus type developments and settings, which is akin to what Bob's talking about, more, you know, lower profile, more outdoor space, and along the river if you can. We think those areas too will do really, really well.
Fantastic. Last question before we have to wrap up. Do we see tenants writing pandemic clauses into their leases at this moment? I guess this one is pointed at Drew, but
I'll hope no. You know, lawyers have to make a living too. So we have lots of lawyers in our building. So I think there will be some discussions on those, but it has to incorporate more than just a landlord and a tenant, because you can't take that kind of risk. It's got to include the lender and how they underwrite the building, what they'll accept, and insurance companies. You know, it's got to be a group effort. Wouldn't you say, Tom, on that front?
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Shared effort.
Yeah, I think if we do that, something can be worked out. I remember, Bob, what was it? The insurance that came out, terrorist insurance?
Terrorism insurances. That's right where I was going to go, Drew. I think, you know, the federal government had to step in because the industry would have been, you know, just killed subsequent to 9/11. And, you know, terrorism insurance became a very big thing. And it had to get that insurance had to get subsidized by the federal government in order to keep the industry going and keep business going. So I agree with you. It has to be totally shared in some way. Otherwise, it just can't work from a single party standpoint.
Definitely. Well, I guess I'll keep rolling until Todd cuts me off, but let's just keep going with the
Good,
question.
you got time left on the clock.
Okay, cool. Then let's keep moving along with a few other questions that we've got. All right, thoughts on the future of the CBD, especially LaSalle Street. I mean, Bob, you were just talking about how, you know, your company is taking a totally different approach to the big buildings and the downtown. I have walked downtown and it's pretty much dead at the moment, but what do we think?
Well, my career started at 208 South LaSalle, which was the heart of the city of Chicago. Everybody knew LaSalle Street, and it was the financial district of the Midwest. And when First National Bank built its building and Golub built their building there, it's kind of moved to Dearborn Street, and then Wacker Drive started. You know, Sears had been built, and then the rest of the development started, and you saw the whole city shift to Wacker Drive, mainly because of the access from the trains being probably the most important thing, and then of course the river views. So the city has gone through these shifts. I do think that the move continues west for some period of time. We've seen many of the buildings along LaSalle Street converted to other uses, you know, multiple hotels, you know, some residential, some different types of uses. You're seeing, you know, at least one of the major banks, I guess two of the major banks, excuse me, moving off LaSalle into Drew's buildings. So we've seen that shift happen. But I think what will happen is you either repurpose buildings or the buildings will begin to renovate into a newer type of office space. And you'll see those buildings retrofit like you saw the post office retrofit. There's, you know, some really big buildings with some really big floor plates that I think will again become attractive because of the price point on those buildings and also because of the amazing transportation that you get into that area. I think it'll take some time, but I think that will repurpose itself.
And I completely agree with Bob. I think you'll see the ongoing trend of adaptive reuse continue on as we move forward. But I think there's another trend that has been going on for several years in downtown Chicago, and you can draw an analogy to other markets across the country. While LaSalle has historically been for a while prior to Wacker Drive emerging as the business address, it was LaSalle, and it was many of the big banks were there. And as Bob mentioned, you've now seen at least two of those make moves further west. But for example, take a look at downtown Boston, where you had a flight of tenants that moved to the seaport, and the tenants that moved back into those often vintage buildings in downtown Boston were the startups, the tech companies, some of your more creative office users. And as part of that, as Bob mentioned, you see older vintage pre-war assets that are being upgraded with amenities that in many cases are on par with Class A buildings elsewhere in the loop. So that's a trend that I fully expect we'll continue to see, particularly as you look at the Merchandise Mart, which has sort of been the epicenter of the tech and creative community in Chicago. It's tough to get space in and around that, and what you've seen is an overfill, an overflow of tenants further south of the river into the loop, and would fully anticipate seeing that continue on.
Fantastic. Anyone else?
I agree with my guys. You can't say any more other than just keep talking. So no, I think that's, it's funny. We all forgot the Merchandise Mart really was, I think, the first one even prior to the post office. You talk about taking a building, it's not your traditional building, in terms of window line, depth, size of floor plate, everything. It was quite a challenge. And I think they did a magnificent job of, revitalizing a building into, from selling furniture and, showing products to becoming a hot tech location. And, being on the river helped, but it really helped bolster all the other development around it. Right now, what's going up, the last piece, which is outside my window here, is the Salesforce Tower, being dropped in. So it's interesting to see how one thing starts and things that then evolve off of that 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years later. People kind of forgot how it all started. So.
For sure. All right. So next up, I want to hear, Drew, a little bit about how you launched 110 and really how you kind of lifted off this building. You were talking about how you adapted through COVID to doing your launch party. I want to hear a little bit about how you did that and what you've been doing.
Well, I think this came out of our discussion about, us, being used to in-person tours and in-person sales and, what we're really all very good at. And then now having to become more virtual. And so we opened a building that's 1.5 million square feet in October of last year. And normally, as I stated, Bob knows this, we would throw a huge party and it'd have 400 to 600 people plus the mayor and everybody'd show up and it'd be great. And, you maybe would probably have 20 real discussions with people, another 50, hey, great to see you, how you been, congrats, and you'd smile, and that would be about it. So we weren't going to have that. So what we decided to do was to make three days contiguous, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we signed up people on half-hour slots from 2 to 10 people. And we did there was about 10 or 12 of us on the ownership side that then led tours throughout the building with masks, fully, COVID related, and said, okay, we're going to take you through the building. We're going to do it the right way and make you comfortable. And then people could sign up virtually as to a time that worked for them, because usually you'd say, oh, I'll see you at noon. Well, I can't make noon. Okay. Well, now they could all pick their slots, and they found out, and then they found out some of their teammates were coming. I'll go with him. And it was a well-coordinated effort, but I will tell you, by the end of it, after 3 days, and then breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we hosted it at the top floor of the building that has not been built out yet. So they had fun. When they were done, they ended up on the top floor, great views of the city, and then we fed them and talked more about the building. So we ended up with a different animal, but I think every bit as successful as a traditional opening party would have been. But in this case, everybody that got there, we really got to talk with everybody, and we all helped out. We sometimes we'd have 2 or 3 of the ownership with a group of 10, or if it was just 2, we'd have 1 person, and we would always be in the lobby on call, ready to go. We had cocktails being served at the appropriate times, of course, never before lunch. We had entertainment. We had a DJ that he was on wheels. So he just motored around with music playing, and it was fun. And we took a situation that normally would have been really crappy, and as I say, full of lemons, and we turned it into lemonade, I think. And at the end, we got a lot of activity out of it, which is really the other good thing. People saying, "Wow, I'm so glad I came and saw the building. I think I've got somebody for you." Boom, and then that leads to other things. So it was kind of basic blocking and tackling from a sales perspective that we went back to, and it really worked out. It worked out for us.
I love that. I love this question that just came in as well. So we're going to see some pent up demand for design and construction services, hopefully, when all these leases come through later. So what design and construction strategies do you think will be employed by brokers? So are we going to be seeing larger interest in fully integrated opportunities like design build?
I do think design build is going to continue to grow. Let's talk about the building construction first, and then maybe tenant improvements second. From the building construction standpoint, we've always had that gap between the architect's intent, as you know so well, Erin, and the contractor's bid on what they did on the job. And filling in that gap, design build, whether it's a fully integrated company like a Clayco from design build, or whether it's pairing an architect with the contractor at the beginning of the job, selecting your architect at the beginning, your contractor at the beginning of the job, pairing them together, and making them a team through the entire job. with joint responsibility for the outcome of the job, I think is in this market a way that is going to just continue to grow and grow. We did our new Fulton East building on a design build basis. I think from the tenant standpoint, this speed to market, making decisions easier for people, having to be, less intricately involved in the construction of your space once you get it designed. I think the pairing of interior designers and interior architects and contractors is going to continue as well. I think it makes it easier for the broker to get some accurate pricing for their client at the beginning of a project and understand what the tenant improvements will cost and understand schedule as well.
For sure. At Clarion, we do some design build work, and we always love to be involved as soon as humanly possible in every project, because when we're able to influence design decisions by providing more accurate pricing, it really goes so much more smoothly for the client via expectation and also what we're able to essentially deliver at the end. So design build has, over the course of time, not really picked up in Chicago, which is very interesting when it's been super hot in other markets, but I'm hoping over time that we kind of overcome this and really integrate that more and more. So last question, what's been the impact of the co-working model in our market?
Well, I mean, yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
No, I was just gonna say the co-working model in terms of where you just, the WeWork spaces?
I would assume WeWork.
I think they're gonna have a hard time. I think if you were in the WeWork or the, co-working spaces, you were typically maybe just popping in for a day or two. I think they're gonna have a struggle.
I think what's going to happen to the co-working spaces is going to shift to the enterprise model. Drew mentioned before all the sublease space that's out there, and people are looking at sublease space in the same way people are looking at spec space, and they want to be able to find a space that fits their needs and just move into it and not go through the whole design and build process. I think you're going to see the co-working space shift to that enterprise model, where what they will do is they will design a space for that particular company of 20, 40, 50, 100 people, and have that space with great flexibility. So there won't be long-term leases locked in on the space like a co-working model, but they can adapt to that company's needs and be super flexible. Catherine, you talked about flexibility being one of the most important things moving forward. I think it will be. You've seen WeWork start to move to that enterprise model in other parts of the nation, and I think you'll see the same thing happening through all the rest of the co-working industry.
Wonderful.
It's going to be tough. It's, Bob, I loved it when a couple of the big co-working groups say, we've got this new model. What is it? We're going to lease to credit tenants for longer periods of time. And I'm like, that sounds like what I do. I think you've realized that what we do isn't bad. So it was kind of funny. They were thinking 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
But whatever. It's, and Bob's right. And like I say, we've got spec suites. Usually every developer has a floor of those. And sometimes those are just swing space, Erin, while they're building out the real space, they'll hang out for 6 months or they'll just move in. We've had tours through there recently and every one of them said, I love this space. Add 3 offices, furnish it, we got a deal. And you're like, okay, let's move on. So,
perfect. Well, that's about our time this morning. And I want to thank everyone so much for their time and all of your wonderful insights, and RE Journals for having us, and get ready for your exciting next panel. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, panel. Fantastic as usual. Learned a lot about downtown. Can't wait to get back downtown. Let's get back to work, huh? So if you're on the next panel, now's the time you want to activate your camera and your microphone. I'm going to do a little tour through our virtual lobby here for a second. So I'm screen sharing right now. Hopefully you're seeing that. Here is our virtual lobby. You've seen it if you got to this event, but just wanted to point out, this is a great place to get good information. So first of all, thanks to our sponsors, Whipley, Avison Young, Meridian, Right Size Power in Chicago, Finishing Chicago, Masons, Bricklayers, Arco Murray, Captivate, Clarion, Comcast. You all are irreplaceable. This, though, this is a great place to network. Well, okay, we're not networking live. I'm doing the best I can here. But if you look at the panels, this is your last panel. It was just on. There's a little in button below them. You can connect with them on LinkedIn. It's the best we can do for networking and live environment. But here's the next panel. So if you want to see who's up, there's them as well. So go ahead and click on these buttons and connect with me. If you see me, Todd Phillips, on LinkedIn too, I'm happy to connect with you. And here's the agenda. See some great ads. And this, if you're wondering, hey, Power in Chicago, what's Power in Chicago all about? We've got the description of most of our sponsors down here. So if you want to learn more, or if you're like, hey, I saw Albert speak, where's Albert's contact info? There it is right there, Power in Chicago. Okay, enough of that. Are you all ready to rock and roll?
You're ready.
I'm going to turn it over to you again. Have a wonderful 1 hour. I'll come back in and kind of hold up my high-tech signs when you're running out of time, and we'll see you all then.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Todd, for tossing it over. I am Andrea Upwood with Captivate. That first panel is a tough act to follow, so I feel like they stole a lot of our thunder. Yeah. And this is my second year back on this panel, so note to RE Journals, I want the first panel next year. So moving along here, again, Andrea Upwood with Captivate. As I mentioned, I happen to be in the loop today, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only one here anywhere to be found. So Captivate, introduce myself just for 2 seconds. We are a digital communication, digital amenity for buildings inside elevators, as well as community spaces or common spaces within the office sector, as well as the multifamily sector. We have recently pivoted to provide things like products called Captivate Scan or Captivate Clean with sanitizer dispensers along with digital communications. Enough about me. So introducing the panel we have today, I am going to go ahead and start with Sean McCarthy. He's the first one I see on my screen. Why don't you introduce yourself, Sean, and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, hi, I'm Sean McCarthy. I'm Vice President of Business Development at Comcast. My team's in charge of doing a lot of our proactive builds. So delivering fiber to areas where we don't serve, and also working with building owners and property management companies to get right of entry agreements into buildings to serve our customers.
Thanks, Sean. Alba, you're next on my screen. Will you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Alba Colabidi. I am an architect by training. I got my degree back in Mexico, but I have a license in Mexico, now in the United States. I work for the design build company, which is CRE LJC Clayco. So I was thanking Bob for mentioning us in the previous panel. So, which by the way, they kind of stole most of our thunder. You were right in there. I had a lot of comments that we were gonna also cover in our hour. But I'm an architect. I design industrial buildings, mostly in industrial areas, from the beginning to the end, development, design and construction. But we're trying to get to being a participant in the design of the Chicago city, which is an amazing city. I have always loved it ever since I started studying it, because the architecture when I was back in school, which I'm not going to tell you how many years ago was that, because you'll figure out my age, but it is amazing. So I'm living it. I'm living my dream, living in the Chicago area, and I want to bring it back to life. So that's why I'm in this panel. I'm participating.
Thanks, Alba. I am pretty sure we all feel the same about the Chicago architecture. That's why we're all here.
Yeah, it is amazing. I cannot even imagine living in another city in the world. So
that's great.
here I am.
Jillian, you're next on my screen.
Hi, and thank you to RE Journals and Andrea as well for leading this. I agree there was a lot of great content that I know that our group is anxious to discuss that was also mentioned in the first panel. But I am a senior advisor with Avis & Young's Flexible Office Solutions team, and our practice is focused on what we kind of consider the three verticals within that entire flexible office landscape, looking at the enterprise and startup occupier solutions. So everything from your 1 to 2 person, startup that's looking for flexible space to those enterprise agile suite solutions that I know were mentioned in the last call. We also work with the operators themselves. So in creating and constructing, whether that's their growth or their agreements with the owners. And that's the last vertical that we focus on the ownership side, is how to integrate the flexible office solutions into their overall asset or portfolio in order to best serve and meet their needs from an asset strategy and leasing strategy to leverage that. So excited to be here and keep this conversation going.
Thanks, Jillian. Ryan, you are next on my list here.
Good morning. Thanks to RE Journal. My video was stopped, so if I could be restarted with my video, I could show my face. Anyhow, we are a full service property management company. We service the greater Chicago area, suburban, and we are going to extend to the across the borders, actually. We specialize in multifamily and cooperative housing. And I look forward to being on the panel with you guys.
Thanks, Brian. Sorry we can't see you. And Ryan, last but not least, please tell us a little bit about Woodfleet.
Yes, good morning, Andrea, and thank you. My name is Ryan Rademan, and I lead the technology practice focused on construction and real estate for Whipfly, and sit here in our downtown Chicago office. Whipfly is a full service accounting and consulting firm that's headquartered in Milwaukee, and we have a practice focused on digital transformation that I'm heavily involved in. So I spend my time hanging out with contractors, developers, brokers, and property managers, working on just that, right? So their strategy for consolidating tool sets and making, those tools that give them the ability to make better, faster decisions, just bringing that all to a single pane of glass. So we've been talking a lot here in preparation and over the course of the last couple hours about data and tools and the aggregate experience and the micro experience for an individual person. And so I'm super fired up about that and excited to talk more about it here today. And just wanted to give a plug for the old venue that we were planning to be at. I'm in 1 North Wacker, which is where Whipfly's office is, and that's just across the street. So we were supposed to be hanging out right here today, and I know Drew was, so I was kind of trying to figure out which space he was from, broadcasting from exactly up there, but super disappointed we can't be together in person there today.
Same.
Ryan, I got to apologize. I was trying to start somebody else's camera. Why is it not working?
That's okay. That's all right.
Thanks for fixing it, Todd. Brian, thanks for pointing out the building behind you. I love looking out our windows here and being able to see the buildings versus, the snow outside my window at home. But I can tell you, I'm not sure I miss the fluorescent lights beaming down on my forehead at the moment, but happy to be back in the loop today. And, springboarding off of Erin's panel, I have been reading every article under the sun, just as everyone has, about the return to work, the office environment, the developing new world that we're going to be encountering. And I read a study that was done by JLL, and it was cited by CNBC in December of 2020 about how do people want to return to work? What do they want? And they came up with 75%. 3 in 4 workers want to return to the office in the future. Does that mean it will be the exact same Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 or 8 to 7, whatever it is that we're all doing these days? Probably not. They're thinking that this is long in the making, and we've just catapulted into this more flexibility style working environment. Whether it's a 1 to 2 day week remotely, or I was already working all over the place, but with an office. So that just will become more the normal is what's being predicted. But the priorities that we've read and really heard about are socialization spaces. I mean, I can only talk to my dog so much before he runs away. But the career outlook, development opportunities come from us being together. And that is what a lot of was mentioned in the first panel with being social animals, and the Healthy Buildings book is going to be a big focus. It's one of my favorite books I've read. Anyone who listen, I spout about the psychology of healthy buildings and how to make your workers more productive. It's a passion project and also grad study for me. So moving from that with the Healthy Buildings link that I posted, thanks Bob for bringing that up. Let's move into our first question. And we started discussing design, construction, leasing, management, financing trends are all things we're hoping to touch on. I know we only have so much time, but what new design and construction techniques are we going to be seeing in new office developments? Again, touched on in the first panel, but what is this going to look like as people move back into their spaces? Anybody can start.
Yeah, I'll take the first shot. I think that it's not going to look like anything we have seen before, or even now we don't really know how that's going to look like in 6 months from now, right? Every day that we wake up and everything is maybe something new had come up with this virus and this pandemic. So I think the key, like the previous panel was saying, is flexibility and adaptability. To have a space that we can adapt to everyday changes and everyday needs will be the key to survive and to bring everybody back safely to work, because it's needed. We are, like you said, social animals, and we can only talk so much to our dogs for sure. But and so we need that collaboration. And actually, work is, in my opinion, more. We can get more out of us if we collaborate face to face, even if it's through a plexiglass or through a glass or with masks on. But having the face to face collaboration, I think, is the design, where the design is going to take us. But it's going to be, we're going to do it with a lot of safety items like the plexiglass and paint that will get us to be the antibacterial, that it will kill viruses or anything on it in 2 hours. So
Sure.
no touchless items like the doors that they were referring earlier in our first panel. Elevators that either work with voice or with your feet or with your, some other item in your body that you don't have to use your hands with. So I think that's where the design construction is gearing up, but mostly safety, to have everyone safe, to have everyone go back to their homes when at the end.
Yeah. Health and safety are the two buzzwords right now, right? But so is flexibility or flex space. Jillian, I know that's in your title.
Yeah.
So if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing.
So, throughout all of this too, that flexibility term we keep hearing over and over again, and not just because that's a part of our team's title or name there, but you talk about that from the design and construction aspect of it as well. And, to your earlier point too, Andrea, that 75% of workers want to return, but how do they want to return? How often are they going to return? A lot of what we're hearing is for those collaboration purposes. So how is that set up in your space? And then from each business itself, it's really, stepping back, taking a reset and a reassess of where things are at, for their particular business and their operations and from a financial standpoint, right? So if it was let's say a law firm that designed their space to be like a Google, they're probably redesigning everything anyway, but they should have never gone that route in the first place, right? For these other groups that, whether they're building out new space from the tenant side or the ownership itself, starting on new developments, what can they design for within their building or their particular space to ensure that they're able to meet those flexibility standards in the future? But then also there's those, very, very important, we'll call it more reactive solutions that they need to address as part of the design and construction side. And that's from, Alba, you mentioned it, the HVAC, the touchless elevators, those things that need to be part of the conversation and maybe done first and maybe in partnership, right, with the tenant and the operator itself. And Ryan and Sean and everything too, I know this fits in. It's also that technology and communication and integrating, this as one entire flexible ecosystem as you think through these design and construction changes and what those mean.
Yeah, you make a really good point when everyone's talking about, flexible working spaces and flexibility. And the thing that comes to my mind is really the technology infrastructure. So when you're looking at building and designing to make these flexible workspaces, you really need to have that connectivity. And that allows for, I think when we're talking about the new technology we're seeing out there or new design, who would have thought we'd have been talking about when you're planning for a new office Zoom rooms, where you can have, seamless connectivity from your employers in the workplace and those connecting with those working from home. So really when you're looking at a lot of these new projects, it's really that technology infrastructure that's going to be right up there when you're talking about your utilities.
Absolutely.
I think if I may chime in, I think an important part of this that I experience even now with bringing my staff back is how do you stay connected to your clients and how do you stay connected as coworkers and colleagues in that same space. And I think the art of stagnant start times, as you guys mentioned, the space that you have and creating the safe environment that you can still function. But I think it's gonna be a while before we can even get a full handle on bringing everybody back or kind of getting back to some normal functionality in the workplace. But I do think the important thing is that the clients and the colleagues and coworkers, still stay connected to keep things running forward.
One of the things that I've, saw actually before the pandemic and the topic of co-working came up, there was this shift of WeWork as an example, leasing to, the enterprise, and in this model where it was a full floor, it was tailored to the individual user. My fiance works at 515 State, and so that's, there's a part of that building that's managed by WeWork. They've got a floor on that building that's dedicated space. And there's a couple things that I saw there, like I said, before the pandemic, that I think are going to be really interesting coming back to the office. So they had sensors on all of the chairs because this was kind of a total hotel arrangement that, integrated with a big display right there when you came off the elevator, and you could have an app on your phone that would show you the same thing. And what that thing was showing was, green if this space hasn't yet been occupied today, red if it's currently occupied, like literal, we can feel that somebody's in the chair, and yellow means, somebody was sitting there in the last hour, let's say. And so I can see it being pretty easy to, reprogram that or make a slight adjustment to that requires it from, requires somebody to manually come and hit a sensor saying, yes, I cleaned this space, for that sensor to move from kind of that yellow or red back to the green state. And so I don't disagree at all that this might take a while for folks to start wanting to come back, right? Most of our organizations haven't really changed their tune here in January relative to what they were thinking back maybe in September, right? It's still going to be a little bit, but we're sitting here trying to understand, and Whipfle's going through a bit of a gutting and refinishing of a space, whether folks are going to be up for this open table style seating, or if everybody's going to want their own private space, whether or not we're going to need plexiglass dividers between those spaces. Some of those things can be changed out over time, but the value of some of those pieces that were implemented pre-COVID, I think, is gonna even grow here. And so I know that there's some tools that are ready for the bright lights, and I'm really excited to see those things in place. I thought it was cool then. Think it's even cooler now.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, Ryan. When we met last week, this panel, we really talked a lot about future proofing. And I think that is something that leads right into that, and future proofing your building to stay ahead of the trend or moving a little faster than we have in the real estate industry before. The discussion of the clean chairs versus the sensor, and I mean, all of that plays right into a well building or a Fitwell certification. I think that we touched a little bit on this in the first panel, talking about air and surface purification systems with an app on the phone. What are some of the trends that property management is seeing, or possibly immediate amenities that need to be added? I mean, maybe Brian, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, one of the things that I am seeing is we're definitely tapping more into the HEPA filter type of materials, and even some redesigning how air flows throughout the office space and or the building itself. I think cleaning the air is a huge part of keeping people safe and kind of keeping this virus under control in these large spaces. The cost of that has been substantial. The HVAC industry knows that, but I think there are creative ways to get that done. A lot of people are going to the medium-built air purifiers, putting so many of those in versus changing their whole air system. But you can get creative and get those HEPA filters. And I think that's important in trying to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Jillian, maybe you've seen something.
Yeah, and I was going to say I had the pleasure to actually speak on a panel last week with RE journals and property managers. And, it's always refreshing to hear more additional insight, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And, we were all being hammered at first, right? With you need to do XYZ for your air quality, or you need to double your size of space, or you should shut down and close all your office space and go 100% remote. So there was a lot of things out there. And I think the property management teams play such an integral part of this, from that communication standpoint, and letting, the tenants know, what maybe is already being done, what's possible, or communicating and integrating, like I said, kind of more of those systems and making that more transparent across the board. So again, it's that data in real time, and how do we best utilize that to be flexible within the building itself. So, those are just a few key things that I wanted to point out from that angle. And one of the property managers made a good point. She said, we don't get a lot of notice when we're doing our job and everything's running smoothly. It's these types of situations where, it starts to become an integral part of the conversation, and that realization starts to take effect.
Yeah, I tell my clients every day, I don't know how they do their job as property managers. I couldn't do it. I would go nuts. But we'll jump back to amenities. You mentioned real-time data, Jillian, and I know that's something that Ryan, we were talking about as well, and Jillian has some info for us. Sean, talk a little bit more about what that means, taking that virtual world and bridging the gap into the present world and the way we consume or the way we move about things. Ryan, I know you had quite a bit of interesting information on that.
Yeah, so we were talking last week about this idea of kind of aggregate data. We've got sensors on every floor that can tell us what the air quality is on those floors, and so we as property managers might be able to address challenges that are arising with the particular space. But organizations of all types, right? If you were a consumer brand, have historically maintained systems that had a bit of a profile on each one of our customers. And so I remember a couple of years ago, there being a technology conference that was put on by the Association of General Contractors, where the the chief technology officer for the Cubs spoke, and he talked about how they were using Salesforce to, to maintain that profile and maintain information on, some of their individual fans or consumers that were entering that Wrigleyville space. And what was really cool is they were explaining that there was a point in time where Wrigleyville, or I should say Wrigley Field, the actual block there that sits between Clark and Sheffield, was a place where when people entered that space using beacons on their phones and the like, they could do a little bit of assessment of where people were spending their money, enjoying themselves, spending more time. We know that in the digital realm, if we're thinking about Facebook and big tech, these organizations are already incented towards keeping people on their digital properties and engaging them in different ways. And I know that that's something that we're seeing here increasingly in the physical space. So, back to the Wrigley Field or Wrigleyville example, right? They used to have that space just in the Wrigley Field itself that could, be aware of who it was that was there, what they were doing, what it is that they wanted, and whether there was anything from a proactive standpoint that could be done to give them a better experience and get them to come back the next week. The concentric circles there have expanded. They're now developing a hotel across the street, or that's been live for a couple of years now, and there's restaurants and retail there, and so they're looking to engage people further and further out and broaden the experience that they have the ability to influence positively. And multifamily has started adapting to some of these trends. They're adopting some of these tool sets. So, in my building, I live at 360 Hubbard Place up on the other side of the river. And, there's similarities there. What amenities am I using? What types of things am I reserving? What requests am I making of both maintenance and of kind of the concierge type staff? And we've heard in the first panel this morning, and even from folks here today, that there are some cues that commercial office buildings and those people that are focused on experience are taking from other industries and other real estate sectors. So I think we're going to see commercial heavily adapt that. I work in a really well-managed building from my point of view. It's managed by Irvine, big 50-story high-rise. So there's budget for these things. And me as a tenant, I'm engaged really only via a PDF that gets sent every once in a while about a little happy hour or some special with regard to the fitness classes. And that gets sent to our office manager, and then she forwards that along to us, and we maybe delete that or maybe read the PDF, but that's about it. But just think about how much opportunity there is there to engage me as a tenant by enticing me in some way to come here and spend time here. I mean, right now, the reason I come and spend time here is because it's the most socially distanced environment I can find. My multifamily building is just bustling with people and excitement, and I kind of love that. But when I need to work and focus, there's something about this building that it puts me in that mode. And so to the extent that building can be helping me understand just how empty it is, helping me understand just how much space there is available and the cool things that are going on here today, whether it's now here in the pandemic and the COVID related area is the stuff that I'm focused on and interested in, right? But if we think about beyond COVID, I mean, there's still going to be plenty of different things that I'm going to be able to be kind of intrigued by and want to spend more time here, want to spend more money here at the restaurants and retail and different things that this property and this neighboring block has to offer.
That work, live, play comment that
It's
Captivate
huge.
actually adopted as our tagline since we've moved into multifamily. But so what you're saying is Wrigley Field knows exactly how much beer I drink and what kind, and
they also know, probably
price.
when to not offer you beer anymore,
Right.
and instead start directing you towards the water station or food. So
and how many clients I have with me, let's Captivate what goes on. But Sean, you had brought up some points about the real-time data as well. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think, a lot of the discussions have been about the healthy space. And we talked about the HVAC. We're also talking about cost savings as well. So I know Ryan brought up, the real-time data and sensors, but, at Comcast, we have a group called Machine Q that provides sensors to facilities and buildings. And a lot of that is for the energy consumption as well and having the dashboard. So we're looking at now, what is a partial building with 25% capacity? How can we manage your energy usage to be a cost savings. So we're looking at a lot of different ways that we can be healthy, make it a healthy environment with sensors and data, but also how to save money and from a cost perspective as well.
Right. The efficiency in the running of a building is probably, in my lifetime, never been called more out. It's been called out into play right now. Jillian, you mentioned a system that you guys use called, it's Avant, and it has a lot of real-time data that it offers.
Yeah, so Avant is a product that we've been creating internally at Avison Young over the past year and a half. And like I said, it takes, real estate and real estate adjacent data and puts that into dashboards, that you can click through and very easy to use. But it does everything from, cell phone tracking data to, seeing what the average median age is, or whether that's income or education level or what have you. And I think that those things are extremely important too, is, you brought up earlier, and I'm going to re-reference this, that, that statistic will say 75%, say they want to return to the office. Okay, well, now companies are trying to figure out what was the occupancy before, and based upon the 75% that may come back, 2 to 3 days a week, what does that actually look like in order for them to make decisions? And, some of these companies, Ryan, to your point, we're ahead of the curve, right? We say COVID accelerated a lot of these trends and things that were already happening, but they're trying to figure out that data and how that is going to impact their decisions. Some of the companies, very large Fortune 100 enterprise companies don't have this data. And, we're all kind of living in, and I hate to use this term, but this new normal, right? As we come out of this, it's a guessing game. You can survey your employees as many times as you want. And, me personally, I could say I'll be in 2 to 3 days a week, but I might have that week where, hey, it's really nice out and I kind of just want to work on my back deck in Chicago in the summer, so I'm not going to come in. So, what do you do in that interim to kind of solve for that without, like I said, making those reactive decisions that in the long run are not going to help your overall strategy? And that's, from the financial aspect as well, Sean, how do you use that real-time data? Do we put a large headquarters office in this location? Do we keep all 80,000 square feet? We can now see, based upon our employee mapping data and who's actually coming into this area, that maybe only 25% are actually there. So then do we, break down our space and take 40,000 square feet in this one neighborhood and then go and add, some more flexible solutions in these call it spoke locations, and that can be by neighborhood or by region at a larger level. So it's just so imperative to have that data in front of you in order to make those decisions, so that you're truly doing the best both for your employees and for the business operational financial aspects.
Jillian, I've been spending a lot of time in West Loop just because of where I recently kind of moved to, and there's a lot of open retail space there at the ground floor, and it's got me thinking about something that I'm curious if any of you guys have an opinion on. We talk about that idea at Whipfly of making our offices a little less of just, cubicle city where we've all got a good space to come and be productive, and shifting it to something that's more of an experience center for not only our associates, but also really importantly, our clients, right? Can we bring them into a space that's going to inspire us all to get creative, whiteboard, share things on screens, and meet virtually in kind of a Zoom room style thing with folks that are in another space like that. And what I was kind of curious about when I was walking through, like I said, kind of Fulton Market West Loop, west of the area, getting closer to Ogden over there, whether some of that, whether it would, move a trend where these commercial offices that are a smaller footprint might even start to live there kind of at the ground floor, kind of like a bank often is doing today, where they're occupying that space. So I don't know if anyone's seen that or anyone has opinions on that, but it seems like it'd be kind of neat.
I mean, we're definitely seeing that. And that's one of the reasons, and we kind of go back and forth on this, is our team is called Flexible Office Solutions, but really it's flexible solutions at the end of the day. And that ties back to that whole live, work, play environment, right? So how do you create these experiences and draw people to these neighborhoods and areas in order to give them the most? And they're doing it in retail. There's, quote unquote, flex solutions from the retail side. You look at it from, the hotel side, take the Hoxton, for example, they've created they have a pop-up experience more in the retail. They have the hotel, they have flexible office space, and they're, working from Hoxton. They have conference room space, Soho. So it's being done. And I think to your point, it's, what can't we do, right?
Right on.
Right. And I will get back to the air quality question, but we did have another question come in about, all this discussion of data. And I say, data is knowledge, is insight, is revenue, is how I always make the jump. And, the better the data, the better the revenue, ultimately, if you use it correctly. But that we're asking, with all of these things that tenants need and their connectivity needs, how is this affecting the need for that fourth utility? Sean, this is definitely your question for the DAS lines or the distributed antenna systems.
Well, I think the question is, you repeat the question? Just what is the...
So with all of this discussion of this immediate data, real-time data, along with the need for connectivity on our own devices, plus home, plus, integrating into a building, is DAS becoming the fourth utility?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is, I think we have some economic developers on this call as well, and not just from the city of Chicago, but from throughout the state. And I think it's important that we reach out to our local partners and our community developers on this. And when you're working on a project, you make sure that when you're talking about water, sewer, you're talking about your energy for your electricity and your natural gas, that connectivity is right there front and center. Going back to what Jillian said about, the spoke model, and you might have your location in the city, and then you have other offices, in other neighborhoods. And it's important that you make sure you're connecting and you're staying connected with your employees and staff. So I do believe it's important. At Comcast, we like to be at those early meetings, even at the design stage. So when we talked about earlier, really your technology infrastructure, that's just as equally as important as, all the other elements.
And that leads right back to future-proofing buildings.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, Sean, having you guys all the way from the beginning of the design is now imperative. Connectivity in the design workplace has been huge, because that's what we're doing it nowadays, right? You have to be flexible in where you connect, and it's not to give the a lot of to Comcast, but it has been great how you guys have been adding things to your company, and how much more and better have the connectivity be surrounding all of this design. And yeah, it's imperative to use them, and it has been a huge help how you guys have been developing your company, for sure, and having you at the beginning of the design.
I can tell you that we like it when we go to an install and DAS is installed, and we're all set to go.
Exactly. So it's just very convenient, because now the design is also being as a hotel or as a dome, or it's not a permanent place anymore, or might not be. It might be or not. In LJC, we have all those hotel stations that are, with the CDC compliant, but to have the connectivity and just to be unplug your computer and not to have to worry about your internet not working or not to have enough speed. We do a lot of design, and our drawings and our information they're huge. So to have that, being able to just send it through, it is very convenient. And all our clients and our tenants, not tenants, but our clients mostly are discussing that all the way from the beginning of the design. So
thank you. I don't want to stray too far away from our amenities discussion and our COVID-19 discussion for the return to work. Maurice Allen in the audience asked, would you rank air quality as the #1 priority of properties to return to work? I'm going to further that question a little bit and ask you to rank what you think your top 3 focus should be for the return to work for buildings. Anyone can chime in.
I'll go first. My top 3 right now is air quality, in environmental health in terms of social distancing, PPE items. For example, Jillian, I think you had mentioned some of this stuff when people come in, being able to sanitize themselves before they even enter the workplace fully. And being able to service the tenants and the clients that you have. Those are my top three right now.
Sure. So I was just going to say, those are your top three for now. But then we start moving forward and think of air quality is immediate, sanitation is immediate. But now we need to retain these tenants. As they slowly trickle back in, what are the things that we need to focus on for retention and renewal rates?
Well, I think keeping the tenants safe when they come and engage the staff, and making them feel comfortable to still continue to make requests, so on and so on. That, when we talked about amenities, that virtual technology and still making them feel close but at a distance is can be tricky. But I think Sean made it clear that we can, with the technologies they offer, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think touchless technology is going to be huge moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, again, the future, looking to the future, what do people need? We talked a little bit about the amenities are, whether it's a tech hub within the building for the tenants or a green space, where we talked about Aon Center and the green space that they're providing. Does anyone else have any insight as to design on some of those amenities?
I'll take that. So we had this client in the West Loop, and they already were getting ahead when the pandemic hit. We had already designed the space for them, but it's bringing and integrating the green spaces in the inside, like the first panel was saying, a 3-season room kind of thing. But having all the amenities where you can attract your people, the workers, to come and feel safe and being able to enjoy the outside inside per se. So to having the cafeteria, doing it safely, to having spaces where you can come and relax when you have a few minutes, that you are not on call and you don't have to be working. So just with the distance, especially, right, that is required. But everything is in the design, just try to bring that 3-season room into the spaces now to make people feel like they're outside mostly, and also having them work and retain them.
Yeah, Jillian, have you experienced any of this amenity push or a trend that you're feeling?
Yeah, and it goes back to that whole live, work, play thing, right? And the other side of that is tenant demands and expectations now are higher than ever. So kind of what you, Alba, and Sean were hitting on from that technology component and connectivity being as early on in the conversation as possible. I feel like now it is. I hope it stays that way. But talking through, the amenities, and I think there are a couple big parts to bring up. You have the health and wellness. Well, that's not just your fitness center, but that's also, is there a doctor's office on site? Are you able to track your temperature when you come in? Are the elevators touchless? Mental health is another component. And that directly ties in as well as to that, then we talk about the restaurants, right? So you want to have those capabilities, whether it's a food service that comes into your building and delivers on a daily basis. But I think at the core of that, you have to know about these things. You talk about retention and kind of that stickiness there as being able to build that. And I truly feel that the technology component of that and that communication is so vital in order for the individual to constantly have knowledge and for that transparency to be there of what's going on and what options are, kind of right under their nose that they may not even know about. And, the booking of meeting spaces and conference rooms. We're seeing a lot of that where individuals may be at their home environment and, maybe there's a business center on site, but they need to have a work professional meeting, but, can't go into the city or for transportation meetings, or have their children that are at home doing schooling as well, and maybe just need to get out of the house and get a break. So having that optionality to be able to do something on demand in real time. The other side of that too is, we talk about it's kind of the chicken or the egg, which came first. And so as building occupancies start to come back up, and, right now, I think it was mentioned earlier on the call too, they're saying about 10 to 12% is what we're seeing in the Chicago market. We're hearing from some individuals too, well, I would love to go back in the office. I don't have to right now. Our company is making it mandatory. I feel safe based upon the precautions and operational standards that they've set up. But if I go down there, then I'd also want to be able to go into the gym, or I'd want to be able to go grab a bite to eat next door. And if those restaurants aren't open and the amenities aren't open, then I'm not going to go into the office yet. So it's kind of that balance. And it's interesting to hear, and this is at an asset by asset level and company by company level, how those decisions are being made. But I think as we, come out of this first quarter and with the vaccines, as people start to come back, that reinvigoration and what they mentioned earlier on the call, as well as, we're hoping and estimating that we're going to see that spike of those areas coming back to life. And, talking specifically about Fulton Market and West Loop, I mean, those are destination places. Those are experiences, right, Ryan, that you want to go to for several different reasons, because you can go to the hot restaurant outdoors, you can go to the rooftop upstairs, but you can also have a, business meeting, if you will.
Yeah, I definitely miss my core power at a risk of sounding a little bougie there, but that is a real thing to keep in mind, is there's a whole experience to where we work, a whole experience to where we live, or the neighborhoods where we gravitate towards. And that experience coming back into the building is going to be under the microscope more than it's ever been when it comes to an office building. What happens from the moment you pull into a garage or walk in the front door or get off the train, all the way to, getting into your door, to taking the elevator, to, we talk about amenities, and we always think of things that are really pleasant. We don't think of the things as much as the touchless elevator keys or the destination dispatch, but that's an amenity that is going to protect our health and safety. And those are the types of things that I know a lot of people are looking to, employ as through all my conversations that I've been having. But it's also a massive undertaking when you're dealing with elevators or, redoing HVAC systems. So has anyone heard of amenities being put on hold to deal with very COVID specific things? Or are buildings really ramping up getting their amenities in order to welcome people back? I don't know, Brian, on property management.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because in the multifamily buildings, we are having to repurpose those spaces. Mm-hmm. And while you want to give everybody the greatest amenities, I think we're honing in now on the focus of technical amenities versus physical amenities. If you look at a multifamily property that have multiple children, these children still have to participate in school. Some apartments may not have the strong internet technology, or have multiple children that need to do multiple things. And that can be stressful in the household. So you repurpose certain areas in the building to suffice for those children being able to come and spread out and still get their work done. So you're right. We are definitely focusing more on the technical amenities. Another good part of that is even with the seniors. So we're all healthy, we're all moving around, and the seniors are like, hey, we still got needs. Even though they may not want to come out much, they still have needs. So how do we get their groceries to them? So we are exploring even options of, talking with the companies that deliver groceries, but how do we get the technology that senior can just punch in those things that they need, and it's delivered to them, versus them having to, physically get involved. And it can be very simple. for them. So repurposing space is a big thing that we're doing.
Yeah, and Jillian, you mentioned communication, so you're speaking my language here. But how do we communicate these things to either the tenant or the resident, depending on what type of building you're discussing? But how do we make sure they know that these new things are being done? Because you could put in this beautiful HEPA filter system and all these cleaning practices, but if they don't know about it, you're not getting the full value of those upgrades, in my opinion. So whether it's an email, a text, a paper under the door, I hate to say that because I prefer the recycling side of that, but what things are being done to communicate this within maybe even flex space, Jillian?
So there, I mean, a ton of advances from the communication. So it's not just, like you said, the paper under the door anymore. It's everything from emails to setting up apps where you can have live chats. And one of the things that I like the most that I've seen done is the conversations, the person to person picking up the phone and saying, what do you need? What questions do you have? Here's what we're doing, just to stay on top of things. And here's how you can connect with us or find out more. Because there also can be things that maybe the property manager on site may not know if that's feasible or if that's happening or what that timeline looks like. But at least they can point them in that direction and have that conversation. But I do think, again, when that real time, and I'm just going to bring up a couple, local Chicago companies, you look at, Rise Buildings and Life Start and some of the things that they've been able to do and at these properties. And I'm not holding out on any of the rest, but they're connecting all those resources. So to your point, Alba, knowing from the touchless elevators, you can find out information about that, or if your package is getting delivered, to scheduling a time at the doctor's office that's on site and that's been set up in repurposed space, to scheduling your time for a fitness center, to creating virtual events and things for the tenants. So I do think one of the biggest things is just that the person-to-person conversations tend to go so much further, because it is hard too at the end of the day to follow up with. I get 10 emails in 10 minutes, right? And maybe only 1 or 2 are directly pertinent to me, or I might catch my eye at that particular time. But by having a conversation or a point person or place to go to find that out, I think is very vital.
So you're saying that we're going back to the phone versus the text or the email, which I love, I'm all for. It's been awkward for a while making phone calls because we've gotten so used to the faceless interaction. And now here we are, face to face all the time on Zoom, Teams calls. I think that's an interesting take. And it wasn't something I thought of, but it's certainly something I'm doing. We have
Andrea,
yeah, please.
we were talking earlier about this idea of these monolithic organizations that have the tool sets and these capabilities to monitor their spaces that they manage and monitor the people in this space. And I think we maybe, skipped over the reverse kind of channels that exist there, right? So these organizations, and when they're implementing these tools, when the Cubs are implementing Salesforce, they are not just thinking about keeping an eye on what's going on and being able to proactively serve, but they're making sure that any way that somebody might have the opportunity to absorb some signal, communication, information, or have a desire to reach out to seek that information, that they're in all of those places, right? So you will, of course, see signs, if we have fan misconduct, text this number, and you'll see the same thing in the bathrooms or in the elevators or at the entrance here in the building, in the office building, saying you can text us here to let us know that there's something we need to look at. If you go onto Facebook Messenger or Twitter and just start complaining, you're going to be connected to the right person immediately, and they're going to know who you are and what it is that you probably want. So there's an inbound element to that, and I think that that's going to be really important. I don't always know, if I used to have a challenge, I'd probably get in the elevator, go down to the front desk in the lobby and ask somebody there, the concierge, for help on something. Now I might want kind of more ways to do it, a more digital way to get in touch. But when it comes to the outbound side, it just kind of struck me that we've got a little bit of a responsibility to the seniors that Brian was talking about. You've been probably reading articles in the Tribune and other places talking about people who are trying so desperately to help their parents and grandparents sign up for testing or sign up for the vaccine. And it's like it's pretty immoral, the barrier to entry to access basic services that is like starting to exist here, right? Call centers have gotten worse and worse and worse. We're sitting on the phone for hours, and that doesn't work when we've just got like limited availability and we're thinking about vaccine distribution, for example. So keeping all those channels open, making the digital tools, the apps, the forms that people are filling out super, super easy to use, and thinking about ways that we can eliminate the direct experience and put a person in between that's making a phone call to make sure that seniors are able to get groceries, medication, daily needed stuff, but then also be able to start to enjoy stuff that the rest of us have just been out here doing, because we're not maybe quite as concerned, right? We're wearing masks, we're social distancing, but we're not locked in our homes. We can go get groceries. And so I hope we're all just kind of thinking about that stuff too, and thinking about that when we're designing these amenities and these experiences, that it's not exclusively reserved for those that can be out and about and doing what they want. And there's opportunity there from a business perspective as well in serving those, and some have benefited from it.
That's a really great point. Thank you, Ryan. I have been thinking about the senior aspect of it and the child aspect of it. Things that I don't have a lot of seniors in my life. I mean, my mother's very young despite her age, but I don't have kids. So it doesn't directly affect me, but I constantly think about my coworkers or my clients. I'm on a phone with a client, we're on Zoom, and a kid, a toy goes flying across, or a dog is in a lap, and at least I have that with the dog. But Linnea asked a question, and this was a question I was actually going to bring up, so thank you for asking it. I believe the pandemic has brought a whole new meaning to bring your son or daughter to work day. So has there been any discussion in the industry for business center learning pods, amenity spaces within commercial offices for workers with children involved in remote learning? Brian, you talked about this in the multifamily setting. I was wondering the exact same thing. How does this translate when we do start coming back into offices, but yet kids may still be remote learning?
Yeah, I think that I think those are necessities. When you look at Chicago and the back and forth with the teachers coming back to the classroom, and the holdout that's before us as well with that, learning doesn't stop. Learning has to continue, and it is up to us in the multifamily and regular office building settings to make these amenities available. I am wholeheartedly for a building repurposing space to open that up to parents to bring their child. Now, the important thing is who's going to manage that. Do we have the parents come down? In one property, we have two staff aides that kind of help. They don't teach your child, but they assist them with getting things done. And even also, they also assist the seniors in technology things and that sort. But it is important that your child or the children are able to still continue to function. You can't get you can't expect everybody to have the most powerful internet to their homes, but you can get a bigger broadband in a media space versus everybody trying to get it to their home. So
thanks for chiming in on that. We have 2 minutes left, or 5 minutes according to Todd, who just jumped on. My computer might be a little ahead of time. But I wanted to ask if there's anything that we didn't talk about, that anyone on the panel, closing remarks, anything that you want to touch on?
Just real quick, Alba, I just wanted to see, have you seen anything from a design standpoint regarding this remote learning in offices?
No, I have not as of yet, as of now. So that will be an interesting point and something that is starting to go in my head and getting my wheels going. That would be a good point. It was already, with the moms and having new children and bringing them to work. I used to do that when I had my kids little, but it has been in my life it has been something that I've done my whole life, and I've been lucky enough that my employers always allow me to bring them. But we'll have to be able to design the spaces like Brian said, and now to have those kids coming to us with us to work. And yeah, the day of bringing your son or daughter to work day is going to be more regular than none. Like before, it was just one day a year, and now it's going to be more often than before. But yeah, that's a good point, and we'll definitely start getting that into our designs. I'm sure that our clients are going to start getting that or asking for that sooner than later.
Sure.
So we'll start incorporating that into ours.
Anybody else have any closing remarks?
I have a question. If anybody had experience or have seen in construction budgets that in the performers, people are adding a COVID budget line item to these performers when they're building out space or anything. Has anybody seen those budgets come out?
I haven't seen anything specific to, COVID as a line item. There again, I think that goes into the flexibility and the repurposing and replanning. So there are additional line items that maybe weren't in there before that are kind of as a direct result of COVID.
As I know, there are grants and stuff that add to those things, and some grant companies want to see that you're specific dedicating to that. So I just wanted to know that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to throw out, that the last panel ended with a question that it was so hard for me to just like not jump in about the co-working. And that's one thing that I think is very important for people to understand too. And Drew and Bob did a phenomenal follow up as well as some of the different utilizations of that and how that, we call it flexible working or co-working and traditional or kind of meeting in the middle, if you will. But the important thing, throughout all of this is that flexible solution, if you will, can be an agile suite. And it might be on a 2 to 3 year term to a private office, to your traditional kind of co-working environment, if you will, to these, mobile solutions that are enabling, employees and people on demand to book space, whether it's a meeting room or a conference room in real time in their area. So there's a million things across the board there, but then there's also all of these prop tech partners and important considerations that kind of feed into that. And I think that, now is the time again. So as, that entire ecosystem from the tenants and the occupiers and the service providers to really look at how do we create these solutions in an agnostic and as bespoke way for every single individual, because there's so much out there that people don't even realize is there in terms of, capabilities and to get back to the office or to get these areas reinvigorated, myself included. I'm learning new things from each of y'all every day. So.
Thanks, Jillian. Stephanie Beckwith made a comment on the side here that just said, from what we've learned, there are a lot of code compliant restrictions for office buildings allowing learning space for children. Fire ratings, fixture heights, just a few of them that they've run into. So that's really helpful. Thank you for adding that, Stephanie, since I didn't have any firsthand knowledge of that. I did want to point out one thing that Bob mentioned in the first panel, that air purification, surface purification, hands-free elevators, the things that we're looking to implement or we're hearing are needed to implement right now are really something that also will protect us in the future. So it's not a temporary solution that we're adding to these buildings. If we talk about future-proofing, we keep saying that. But air purification systems are going to help with environmental factors as well, not just a pandemic or the flu and cold season. These are things that will help sustain us in office buildings in the long term. And I think that's really important to think about. If anybody doesn't have anything else, I think I'll turn it back over to you, Todd. You flashed me the 1 minute.
You gotta love my high-tech signs. They're working really well. Everybody sees them. So I don't know. If I did something else, nobody'd see it. Thank you again to sponsors. Thank you again to panelists. What an informative day. I have to tell you, I'll be completely honest. I've sat through a lot of online events this year. I'm well over 100, and I learned a lot of new stuff today. So thank you for delivering unique and new content and engaging. Thanks, everybody. Wonderful week. Let's do this live as soon as we can. I'm guessing 4 months. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.